little, yes. I guess my other summer vacations that I remembered were vacations where our family did something different. One summer, my mother and my two brothers and I, went up to Cape Cod, and we had a whole month to just have a great time in the New England summer, swimming, and by then I did know how to swim. And it was that summer, it was when the war was just beginning. So my mother had planned to drive us out to Seattle to visit her sister's family. And when the war happened, she was a government worker, and she wasn't allowed to be that far away from her job. Not that she was vital to anything having to do with the defense of the country or anything, but it was just the policy of the government. So we were all crushed and disappointed. We couldn't drive. We were going to drive out to visit these cousins and my aunt and uncle, whom I didn't ever remember meeting. So, but we went to Cape Cod, and we had a great summer. So that and visiting my uncle in New Jersey, we'd go up there sometimes in the summer. So summer vacations were memorable to me.
Okay, that's great. Okay, where did you grow up? What was it like living there? Was segregation prevalent where you lived?
Well, I was born in Washington, D.C. and lived there until I was 9. And of course, Washington was very segregated. And there were no minorities in our neighborhood. It was a white middle-class neighborhood. And we moved to Silver Spring, Maryland. And here again, Maryland was de facto segregated. They weren't that hard about it, but they just didn't have anybody in their neighborhoods to going to the school. So I never had any mixing, except for exposure to, we had a maid and she would bring her son and we'd play together. So I never had any biases or prejudices about anybody that I got from my family. We just didn't have the opportunity to mix very much until I got to be a young adult, and then I mixed voluntarily.
Okay. So, where did you grow up? What was it like living there, and was segregation prevalent where you lived?
I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. I wasn't born there, but that's where I lived from the time I was about 4, maybe 5, until I went off to college, and the world changed then for me. But about segregation, you're asking in particular. And I was lucky to grow up in a home where my mother wasn't raised in the South in Virginia, where Alexandria was, and she had gone to a college where blacks, African Americans were admitted, and she had known and worked with African Americans, and so I didn't have any close relationships ever with a girl my own age or a boy my own age, because everything was very segregated in Alexandria. But we had occasion with a maid and so forth to get to know some other Africans Americans while we were living in Alexandria, and I was just raised knowing they were people and I was always very grateful that we were all, children of one God, and so I was lucky and fortunate to do that, and we were aware of the prejudice and thought it was very wrong, but back then there was not much of a movement and to do anything about it, but we were aware of it. And I never really talked to a young person my own age who was an African American until I got on the train to go off to college in Ohio. And there happened to be a young girl, not from Alexandria, but nearby, who was on the train, and I got acquainted with her. That was the first time I'd ever spoken to a person my own age who was not white.
Okay. Okay, have you ever met anyone famous or interesting?
Well, yes. In the course of my career, I've met dozens of them. Um, uh, I I worked for the Boeing company for 19 years, and as such got exposed to presidents, vice presidents, secretaries and assistant secretaries, generals, admirals, all of those people. And then I started my own consulting business, and so I had direct contact with a lot of high-level people. I won't name names because it's not significant historically, but they were, I got very at ease with high-level people. Had to, in order to be a successful consultant.
And did you say you met some presidents, like, of our country?
Of companies.
Oh, of companies. Okay, I was
No.
gonna say if you met like the president, that's
No,
pretty cool.
I never did that, no.
Okay, but that's cool too, though. Okay. And did you ever meet anyone famous or interesting?
Well, I've met some interesting people, I guess, along the way. But I don't think I've ever met anybody who was really famous. I mean, met them in order to shake hands, even say hello. I don't think so, really. Maybe I'd have to think about that a bit. I have
Well,
to.
how about Mr. Lewis?
Well,
Representative
yes,
Lewis.
actually I did. That's the most recent that might have happened. John Lewis. Does that name sound familiar to you?
No, who is he?
Well, he's African American, and he is now quite elderly, I guess. And he was pretty old at the time. I just happened to see him at Costco. Actually, my husband saw him ahead of us and said, "I just talked to John Lewis." And I said, oh, I've got to go. Is he still here? I've got to go thank him. And was very, very active in the civil rights movement. In fact, any of the movies that we've seen recently having to do with the big event in Washington, when the March on Washington, he was very young then, and he participated in it and was one of the leaders. And he's still very much of a fighter for what is right along those lines. So he was very nice to me. He didn't say, go away, you bother me. In the store, he accepted very graciously my words of appreciation for what he's done in his life. So I guess you're right. That's probably, I think as a child, my mother introduced me through her work a couple of times to some scientists who were fairly well known, but I was a kid and didn't remember exactly who they were, so best I not talk about that.
Okay. Okay. What's the most fun or interesting thing you've ever done?
Wow, the most. Well, I love to fly, and as I said before, that was an early memory, and so I became a pilot, a professional pilot in the Air Force, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Even though you look back and you say, "Ooh, that was pretty dangerous," and didn't that bother you? And guess we always said, if it bothers you, you better get out of it. But I considered it fun, and I think you wouldn't subject yourself to it if you didn't.
Okay. What is the most fun or interesting thing you have ever done?
Well, let me think. I'm not going to be able to answer this one very well without a little more thought and reflection.
Right,
So-
we can come back. Do you want to come
All right,
back to this one?
Fun or interesting thing?
Mm-hmm.
I've done a lot of interesting things. I mean, to me they were interesting, but to think of the most or something that would be of interest, no, I have to come back to that one.
Okay, we'll come back at the end.
All right. Help me think, Ted. Think of any enterprises that I was involved with you in that were fun and interesting? Oh, well, building our house, that was interesting.
That's true.
And it was fun most of the time. A lot of hard work.
Yes, in 1982, we bought a nice piece of property on the water in the northern neck of Virginia, and we proceeded to build a house over 4.5 years. And although it seemed like it was an awful lot of work, we did it on weekends, we thoroughly enjoyed it. And worked together as a team and hired subcontractors to do things. And we still have that house, which the family enjoys. So, yeah, that counts.
Okay. Were you involved in any wars, or was anyone you loved involved in any wars?
Well, I was involved in what's called the Cold War. After I was too young to be in World War II, in the Korean conflict, I was at the Coast Guard Academy, so I was already in the military. And then after I went on active duty in the Air Force, our job in the Strategic Air Command was to threaten the Russians with sure annihilation. And that produced a standoff, which was called the Cold War. And it went on for 30-some years until the Soviet Union collapsed. And it worked because we never had World War III. And it was dangerous and it was serious. And we trained very seriously, just like if the whistle blew and we were told to go, we would go and knew just what we would do and where we would go. And the Russians believed that we would do that too, working for General LeMay. So, yeah, that was very warlike. And then, fortunately, I never got involved in the Vietnam War, which I disagreed with. So, but working in the defense business, I was always associated with the subject of national defense and warfare. So, kind of made my whole career on the subject.
Do you have any memories from World War II or other wars?
Yes, we actually participated in a film by public broadcasting about our experiences in Washington during World War II. It was very exciting, and although we were 10, 11, 12, 13, we actually had jobs associated with the war effort. I worked for the British Army staff and in downtown Washington and was a messenger delivering mail and messengers around town. We participated in saving fats and metals and papers and everything to contribute to the war effort. So we were very aware of the implications of the World War and were dedicated to making it come out right for the free world. So yeah, I feel like we've grown up in that environment. We've been in almost a constant state of warfare since I was a kid.
Okay. And how about you? Are you involved in any wars?
I wasn't involved in any wars. I was just a kid during World War II, and after, subsequent to that, the wars that have happened have been only involved as far as my husband was involved, and he was a pilot during the Cold War era, so if that counts. But I had a cousin who was in war. We didn't have a lot of relatives who were, well, we didn't have a whole lot of relatives to begin with, I guess, as many as some families. But I had a cousin who was a paratrooper in World War II, and he was had just gotten his medical degree and was in some of the training to go ahead and become a doctor when he got drafted. And he was healthy and young, so he ended up being a paratrooper. And I worried about him a great deal during the war. I was just, how old, 12, something like that. But Cousin Louis meant a lot to me. And I really was worried the whole time that something was going to happen to him. And we knew that he'd gone over to be a troop during the D-Day invasion. So I remember very vividly the morning I was getting dressed up to go to school, and I heard the paper boy calling extra, extra, extra as he was trying to sell his papers in the neighborhood. They used to do that back then. The paper had issued a special edition because of the invasion of Europe that we had gone over. with our troops, and we knew that my cousin was going to be part of the paratroop force, the 101st Airborne. And I can remember crying because I was really worried about him. But he managed to come through the war. He was in the heat of action, and he was one of the very few that got through, and didn't have any injuries. He went ahead and treated men and did everything he was there to do. And on the very last day there, he got cut on some barbed wire. That was the only thing that went wrong with his time there. But I'm sure he was very brave and did what he had to do well. So he came back.
Very lucky.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. What is the greatest injustice you have ever witnessed?
Well, after we got married and went in the Air Force, we lived in Florida, Mississippi, Texas, Kansas, Alabama. And that's mostly deep south. So we were very aware of the segregation there. And during that period, it was beginning to be resisted much more strongly, the 60s in particular. And we lived in Huntsville, Alabama, which was a sleepy little southern town until the space program blossomed there. And so we saw firsthand the way blacks were treated. And we actually had some freedom riders that came from the north to help those people register to vote. And they stayed with us. And so we knew and contributed to the effort to help liberalize the South. So we met some of the civil rights leaders there in Alabama. So it was sobering to see how people were denied normal living and to see it improve over our lifetimes. You can't imagine how much it improved. I can remember as a little boy when we took a vacation in the South, seeing blacks in chain gangs along the roads, being monitored by white guards with shotguns. And in Mississippi, we could see the slave quarters out behind the houses where they had lived. That was a very momentous occasion in our lives. We saw it change. Our children now take for granted that blacks should be accorded equal rights, but it wasn't so in our early lifetime.
Right. And what is the greatest injustice you have ever seen?
Well, I just shared all those experiences with my husband, who's just described what it was like, and I would agree with him that in our lifetimes, our personal experiences have been that. I suppose when I think about it, I could think of some other injustices that didn't have to do with the subjugation of other people, but were just things that were wrong, that were done, but I can't right now think of a good enough one, or to be able to express it well enough. I'd have to think about that a bit more. But I would agree with my husband that that's probably the greatest, certainly for the greatest number of people, not just some person we knew that wasn't done right by somehow. So that's about the best I can do right now.
We can come back to that one too if you want to.
Okay, well I really...
Yeah. If you don't think of anything, it's fine. Okay, tell your favorite story about your spouse.
Well, I like to make fun and trivialize some things just to be interesting and just to prove that I love her. But the one that comes up periodically is when we were living in Mississippi and we went to visit some friends in Arkansas. And so to go there, you cross the Mississippi River and go into the state. And when we were coming home, she was a relatively new driver. I had taught her how to drive, as a matter of fact, which is how we met. And so we're going south, and then we get to the road to go back to Mississippi, and she turned and started down the road, and I said, did you notice anything like the sun shining in your eyes? And so she was going west, and we should have been going east. And she's been struggling with east-west ever since.
Not to mention north-south. Oh dear,
Tell your favorite story about your spouse.
oh dear, I would have to think about that. I'm not going to be very good at coming up with something right this minute.
How did you all meet?
Well, maybe that would be my favorite story. Okay, that would be my favorite story because it was the first time I set eyes on it. I had just finished, just graduated from college, just finished college, and I didn't have a car, and I didn't have any prospects of having a car. But somehow I thought, well, all right, like I'm a citizen of the world now, I've got to at least know how to drive a car. I think what had happened was a graduation weekend, as a matter of fact, someone said, Mary, can you please back this car out the driveway so we can whatever, somebody else's car. And I said, I don't know how to drive. And they were dumbfounded that I didn't. Here I was. I didn't know how to drive, but so I made up my mind I was going to learn to drive. And I got a job that summer before I went off to do what I was going to do in the fall. And I decided I was going to take some of that money and buy some driving lessons because I tried to learn with my mother, and we got along beautifully, but as driving instructor and student, it was a total ruin. So anyway, she thought that was a good idea too. So I called a driving school, and the gentleman that they sent out for me, and I had my first lesson with, went on a vacation. So who should show at my door to take his place but my dear husband. Of course, I didn't know he was going to be that at the time, but anyway, and I can remember, it's funny because I can remember exactly what he had on and exactly what he said when he came to the door, even though it wasn't like, oh wow, and he made a big impression, but I just remember that. So, anyway, that's my answer to that one.
And that's a great story, so. Okay. Have you ever broken the law?
Yes. Usually not blatantly, intentionally. Traffic-wise is the usual way. And the one I thought was the most unfair was when we were going up 95 on the way to Baltimore. And I know that the police monitor that, and I was scrupulously observing the speed limit. And we had a little green a Ford Escort. And we were tooling along, and another Ford Escort, also green, just like that, went zooming by us. And in a little while, we got waved over to the side. And this very staid police officer said, well, you were going 75. I said, officer, I was not going 75. I said, did you see that other green Escort? He said, just fill out the paperwork. And so I thought it was serious enough that I went to traffic court and didn't accept it. And I thought it would make sense to tell the judge that it was a misidentification with another identical looking car, and he didn't buy that. So I paid the fine. It was very unfair. They said I broke the law, but that.
Yeah. What about you? Have you ever broken the law?
I probably have. It wasn't a law, was it, in Mississippi not to drink? It was a reverse law. In Mississippi, they had water fountains downtown, and they said, for white use only, there was a sign on them, and no, that's not how
White
it
and
worked.
black.
Pardon, there was white and black, that's right. They were segregated water fountains. And both of us deliberately went up and drank from the black one, just cross. So I guess that was breaking the law. Other than that, I've been pretty law-abiding. I've never been arrested or stopped for a traffic violation or anything like that. So I'm pretty law-abiding. I think.
That's a good way to be. Okay, talk about your children.
Well, we have 4 wonderful children. The oldest is a girl, and then I was followed by 3 brothers, approximately 2 years apart. And she's the smartest. The boys probably wouldn't like me. No, I think they'd agree. And she's great at studies and a great teacher, which is what she's now doing. And it was interesting to see her grow up and see her capabilities. She was Phi Beta Kappa and with a 4.0 average at University of Wisconsin, and then went to Harvard Law School, and then a few years later decided she didn't like the law. So that's why she's teaching in the Arlington school system. She's a very interesting lady. And our oldest son is an architect in Seattle, and that's what he always wanted to do. And he was the one who was the Eagle Scout. And he's a very interesting man and has a nice family, 2 nice grandchildren. And our second son is a professional musician, which is after our hearts, being musical ourselves. And that makes for an interesting career. We kind of get to share with whatever our children and grandchildren do, which is what makes it so rewarding. And he plays with the Pittsburgh Symphony, and his wife does too. So anyhow, that's interesting. And our youngest son is an artist, as is his wife. And so that she works for the Smithsonian, and that gives us another kind of exposure. So we benefit by all of the interesting things that our children and grandchildren do.
You want to talk more about your grandchildren too?
I'll let my wife talk about the grandchildren.
Okay. All right. Would you like to talk about your grandchildren or your children?
Yes, I would. My husband's just described the 4 children, and I would agree with his characterization of them. I just have to say I really enjoyed being a mom. I loved it. I think it was you learn so much raising children. You learn yourself so much. And I think it's a huge responsibility, and I took it seriously. But we had a lot of fun along the way. And I think my husband's described them pretty well. We've shared a lot of experiences with them growing up that enlivened and enriched our lives just from the things that they were involved in that we got to share by being their parents. So now we have 9 wonderful grandchildren. And they've vary in age from about 23 maybe, or
22.
So. 22 or so.
To 13.
To 13. So they're all kind of close together, so that's a lot of kids at that age. And 2 of the families are living far away, not near us, so we don't get to see them very often. But we're sort of learning again, going through that same cycle of learning with our grandchildren, their activities and the wonderful things they're doing. They're 3 granddaughters, and the other 6 are boys. So they're not boys anymore. They're becoming young men, young women as well. And they're in college now, except for the youngest ones, and coming back home and changing. And we're not as close to them, of course, as their parents are, because we're not with them daily, but we're still reaping the rewards of having had a family with our grandchildren. They bring us lots of pleasure.
Okay. Okay, what is your favorite holiday story with your family or friends?
Well, my family never had observed religious holidays. Christmas not considered in a religious sense, but just the season and the opportunity to be together. But I think, the normal remembrances of 4th of July, Easter, Thanksgiving, of course, is a chance for disparate parts of families to get together, and Christmas also. I guess I would say it was a big deal. It wasn't like, oh boy, I can hardly wait until that comes along. Just part of life to me.
Right. And what about you? Do you have a favorite holiday story with your friends or family?
Well, I think Christmas was always the highlight, certainly for the kids, I think. Of all the holidays, which we celebrated the usual holidays. And I think that now that the children are grown, or when they were getting out on their own, they came home at Christmas from school or wherever, and now they try to come back with their children too when that happens. So Christmas is the highlight, and that we have our usual semi-traditions. We're not hidebound in what we have to do or don't do, but I don't have anything terribly unique to add to that. We did it, our Christmases probably in a pretty ordinary way, but they were always very special, and mostly it was just because we were all together. I think I remember Christmases at my family during World War II, though, when I always remember the year, Christmas trees were in short supply, which sounds kind of silly, but either the men were not available to cut them, or there was a conservation effort going on or something, but it was very hard to get a Christmas tree. And somehow I found out that one of the kids in my class had an older brother, and somehow he had either gone out and cut some or something. So my brother and I took the sled. Had snowed, and we took the sled to his house, which was quite a ways away, and tied this real scrawny looking Christmas tree. It was not a prize home with us, but it was a very special one, because there it was, when we might not have had a tree at all. So I remember that.
It's good. Okay. Last question. What other interesting stories do you have? Please share as many as you can think of.
Well, let's open up the book. It may sound trivial, but it was significant to me. I went to the Coast Guard Academy for 2 years, and I decided that the academics were very severe, and that was not the right place for me, so I resigned from there. So you would think, okay, that's the end of an era, but there's a great deal of camaraderie created in a service academy, as in any military organization, such that once you were a member of the class, you were always a member of the class, even if you didn't graduate. And only about half of my class graduated, so that left the other half who would normally just go about another part of their lives. But through the effort of one or two of our classmates, they keep everybody together. And so we've had 23 reunions over the years, which are very meaningful. And when we got ready for our 50th reunion, which is the honored reunion at the Academy, I actually thought that the people who hadn't graduated shouldn't really participate, because they're really honoring the 50-year graduates. But the class committee persisted and said, no, everybody who was a member is going to participate. And furthermore, we're going to accept your suggestion about everybody wearing the same outfit and marching on to the field to be honored. And furthermore, you're going to lead us playing the Saints Go Marching In. So we actually made the cover of the alumni magazine. And so that was one of the major events in my life, that ironically that I should lead my class onto the field in front of all the admirals and all the other people without having been a graduate. But it was because of their policy and making all of us welcome. And just last week we had our 60th reunion, and we marched on the field again, and I played Saints Go Marching Unit again. So that's a very important element of the acceptance and the camaraderie of the people that you grew up with.
Okay. Do you have any other interesting stories you'd like to share?
Oh my. I don't know. Can you suggest one? You'd think nothing that I think anybody would be all that interested in, probably, unfortunately.
Okay. Nothing about your parents or maybe about your siblings?
Well, you know, a number of these questions are things that I would have done much better answering if I'd had a while to think about it and kind of put it all together. Because I haven't lived a very dramatic life. I've been relatively healthy. I don't have any stories to tell about being terribly ill and getting well or anything like that, which can be a big drama. No, I don't really think of anything right now.
How about being related to the royalty of the Netherlands?
No, that's...
It's kind of indirect.
But I was going to say it's so long ago, and it's not totally indirect, but at any rate, it just was. I had nothing to do with that. I just was born onto the earth, into the earth. So, no, I don't.
Except when we got to the Netherlands, and our guide found out that she was related to Queen Wilhelmina and Queen Bertha, wasn't it? Beatrice. Oh, they were in awe. Good heavens.
Yes, that is true. That is true. That was a funny story. We were with the group. I guess I'm not thinking of that as anything so unique, but it was impressive to be in that land, to visit Holland and that part of the world, and to see a statue of the Queen in a park, and Ted took my picture with her, but it was through my mother's family, her father's family, his mother. It was, no, that would have been like my great-grandmother, who was a little girl when she came to America, and she came because her father was the younger brother of the guy that was going to be the king, I guess, or whatever. And he was sort of a dissident as far as his beliefs went. He was on the wrong side of things politically within the family, so he decided to take his family and leave. And they left by dark of night, the story goes, and it's been passed down in our family, because they wanted to do this privately and secretly. And the servants all came out to say goodbye. The servants knew they were leaving, the people that had taken care of them, I guess. And they did it by candlelight, and they walked down the mountain to the car, or whatever was waiting for them to take them to the boat that brought them to America. So they settled and ended up in Ohio somehow or other. And but that's a long time ago and far away.
That's a really cool story.
But the interesting thing was, when we were on this tour, and Ted had just taken my picture, I think, standing next to the statue of Queen Wilhelmina, who was a much beloved monarch. Well, it was Queen Wilhelmina.
No, it was the other one.
Her mother? Oh, yes, it was her.
Not Bertie, you just said.
I would have had to study up on this thing to answer this exactly correctly, but I have a picture on my desk. No, it wasn't Beatrice. I think it was Queen Wilhelmina.
Well, anyhow.
Well, anyway, she's the best known monarch, I think, except for the monarchs there today. Anyway, it was fun when it got pointed out to people, and the guides who were from that part of the world all went, ah, which was kind of hilarious. So I was a little embarrassed, but it was fun. So that's that.
All right, cool. Did you want to go back to what is the greatest injustice you have ever witnessed? Did you want to go back to that one?
No, I really would agree with Ted that overall I can't think of an individual incident. Does that make a problem for you? If
No,
that's
no,
a
it's
gap
fine.
in
I wanted to
information?
make sure we went back to the
well,
ones.
Thank you, that's thoughtful of you. I'm just trying to think. Some of these questions I really have to ponder a bit. They're good questions.
Oh, thank
They're
you.
thought-provoking, obviously. I wasn't expecting to have you ask some of the things you're asking me. And if I thought about it a little bit, I would have been better prepared. Ted's lived a
fine.
far more exciting life than I have, I think.
I don't know. I think
Although
you're
I've
pretty
been,
exciting too.
I've been part of it.
She's absolutely a part
I've
of
been
it.
part of
For
it, so-
59 years, I guess so.
So, if I can not do any more than I've done,
Yeah,
that'd
that's
be
fine.
acceptable.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
fine.
All right.
I just want to make sure that you shared everything you wanted to share.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good. That's good.
Okay.
Have you gotten good results from people? Interesting